Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin. I bear witness that no one deserves to be worshipped except Allah Ta'ala, the one who has no partner and no similar, the one who has no length and no width and no depth and no perimeter, the one who's not a volume and is not in a place. And how could he be in a place when he existed before time and space? He created everything except himself, including you and your actions. Nothing occurs except by his will, both good and bad, he destined to happen. He speaks without sound, letter, or language, not Arabic, Hebrew, nor Korean. He's not light, he's not a spirit, he has nothing in common with human beings. He's not in the direction of up, down, right, left, front, nor back. And whatever you imagine in your mind, Allah is different than that. And I bear witness that our noble, unrivaled Master Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is the slave of Allah, his final messenger, and the best of all of God's creations. May Allah unite us with him in paradise and grant us a drink from his basin. And may Allah increase us in patience, humility, knowledge, and comprehension, and help us to put our knowledge into practice and grant us all sincere intentions. Ameen. We're continuing in the book, the Hadrami introduction, Al-Muqaddimah Al-Hadramiyya, which is an introductory text in Shafi'i fiqh, written by the Allama Bafadul Rahimahullah. We have made it to page 43 in the book. Page 43 in the book. We're in the chapter talking about the conditions of Salat. And I remind you that when we say a condition, we're not talking about the what they call in this book the pillars, or what are called in other books the integrals or the obligations of the Salat. Okay, the pillars, integrals, obligations, these things are things you must do or say or have in your heart during the prayer. The pillars, they come in a certain order. So you'll do one and then complete it, and then you'll do another one and then complete it, and then do another one and then complete it. But the conditions are not like that. The conditions don't come in some kind of sequence. Okay, a condition is something that has to be true from the beginning of the Salat all the way until the end. If for even one moment during the Salat, one of the conditions is no longer true, then that means your Salat is now broken. Your Salat is invalid. Your Salat will not count. Okay, just to quickly go through remind you some of the conditions. We said Islam is a condition. So if a person is a kafir, or if they leave Islam in the middle of the Salat, then that means the Salat is not valid. Differentiation is a condition. So if a person loses mental discrimination by going insane, or if the person simply doesn't have mental discrimination at the beginning of the Salat, maybe because they're already insane or because they're too young, then they do not have a valid Salat. Number 3, entrance of the time. If your Salat has a time, such as the 5 obligatory Salats, then it's a condition that the time has already come in before you pray it. This means praying a Salat before its time will not count. Number 4, you need to believe that the Salat you're praying is an obligation. This is true, obviously, only if the Salat you're praying is an obligation. So like the 5 daily Salats, for example, when you're praying those Salats, you must believe in your heart that this Salat is an obligation, because if you don't believe that it's an obligation, then the Salat will not count. Number 5, you must not believe that any of the pillars of the Salat are actually optional, because by failing to recognize the obligatory elements of the prayer as obligatory, that will invalidate the salat. It's almost like you're not recognizing the prayer itself as being an obligation. Number 6, you must have wudu and have ghusl. If at any point in the prayer you lose your wudu or you lose your ghusl, then that means you broke the prayer. Number 7, you must make sure that physical najasa does not invalidate your salat. This happens by physical najasa coming into contact with your body or with your clothing, or if you touch it in the course of the salat, like if it's on the ground and you touch it, or your clothing touches it in the course of the salat, or if you're holding it, and the whatever you're holding, the part of it that moves when you move is contaminated by najasa. All of this means your salat is invalid because you're either contaminated with najasa yourself or you're carrying something contaminated with najasa. And last time we ended the class giving more information about this najasa case, because najasa, yes, it invalidates the prayer, but some types of najasa are excused. Okay, there's some types of filth that if it comes onto your body or your clothing, even though it is najasa, it will not break your prayer because that najasa is excused. So if you turn to page 43, we're on page 43. Let's go back a few sentences and talk about these types of najasa that are excused when you're in the prayer. Meaning, although it's najasa and although it's on your body or your clothing, it will not render your salat invalid. These are excused. At the page 43, the third paragraph, it says the area of one's cleansing is excused. This is where the author begins the section where he starts mentioning types of najasa that are excused in the prayer. And the first one he mentions is the area around your privates that you wiped with stones or toilet paper, assuming you wiped away all of the filth itself, and assuming you wiped at least 3 times, then we say your area has been purified by this istinja. But it's not truly purified, because if you just wipe with stones or with toilet paper or with tissue or with leaves or whatever you're using, it can remove the physical najasa, but it can't remove the traces. Okay, it can't remove the smell, the taste, or the color. So what that means is the area is not truly purified, but rather what it is purified enough for you to make a salat. Okay, that's because those traces that cannot be removed by the stone, that cannot be removed by the toilet paper, those traces are excused. That's what it means when it says the area of one's cleansing is excused. It means those traces that are left behind, they actually are najasa, and the area is not actually purified, but those traces are excused. So you can make a valid salat if you chose to wipe with toilet paper instead of using water. He says, as is the mud of the road, which one is certain of its impurity. And again, by mud, he doesn't mean like what we think of as mud, like dirt that has so much water in it that it's slippery. When they say mud, they mean like bricks. In much of the world in the past, they used to take dirt and they'd mix water in it and make mud, and then they'd turn it into bricks and they'd bake it. So then you had actual bricks that you could use to build buildings with and that you could use to make roads with. So if your road is made of bricks, or like nowadays where you have a sidewalk that's made of, cement or whatever the sidewalks are made of, concrete, these things, the ruling is, even if you know that spot is contaminated by najis filth, the road that you're walking on is excused because it's too difficult for you to avoid every place that's contaminated in the road. Okay, probably every spot of the sidewalk has been touched by a dog at some point. Then he says, and what is usually difficult to shield oneself from. Okay, so another thing that's excused in the prayer is the things that are difficult for you to protect yourself from. So an example would be like a cloud. Say you live on a dirt road, a car drives by, kicks up a cloud of dust, and that dust contains in it little bits of feces because, animals cross that road and poop in that road. And, that dust that's going to be kicked up in the air and blown everywhere, it's too difficult for you to avoid that. Okay, it's good. It blows all around. And it's difficult for you to avoid being hit by this dust. And so it's excused. He says it differs depending on the time and its place on the clothes or body. So sometimes certain things are difficult to avoid during one season, but they're not difficult to avoid during a different season. So during the rainy season, when it rains a lot, there's going to be filth on the ground, which might cause the bottoms of your feet to be contaminated with filth, or the bottoms of your clothing to be contaminated with filth. And it'll be excused in the prayer because during the rainy season, it's too difficult to avoid that. It's too difficult to prevent that from happening. But then in the dry season, though, it's actually quite easy to avoid getting filth on your feet or your lower garments. And so in the dry season, it would not be excused. Yes, I'm aware that I disappeared. I don't know what happened. My camera is still working, but for some reason, I'm not appearing on the screen. But as long as you can hear me, that's good enough. Let's continue from there. That's where we ended last week. So let's continue. It says, as for the blood from pustules, boils, and ulcers, and the pus and fluid from them, blood of fleas, lice, mosquitoes, and he says, and bugs, but this word buck in Arabic, it doesn't mean bug. The word buck is referring to a very particular type of insect, what we call bed bugs. Okay, bed bugs is what this means. So you might want to just add the word bed right there. But he's talking about fleas, lice, mosquitoes, and bed bugs. Okay, all of these things are examples of blood that is excused. So if you're in your prayer, okay, and you start bleeding, say you had like a pimple or something and it popped while you were in the prayer and pus came out or blood came out, this would not invalidate your prayer. Even though blood is najas and even though pus is najas, blood from pustules and boils and ulcers, what do you call them things that you get like on your feet? Can't remember the word for it right now. But sometimes if your foot rubs against your shoe a lot, you get like a little bubble right there, and then liquid starts oozing out of it. These sorts of things, if these things leak out during the prayer, they do not invalidate the prayer. They're excused. Okay, similarly, if you had an insect on you, like a flea or a louse or a mosquito or a bed bug, okay, and I don't know, say you swiped your hand on it, and by swiping your hand, you ended up flinging the animal off of you. Okay, the body of the animal flew off of you, but it left behind a drop of blood, which sometimes happens. Like if you hit a mosquito or a flea or something, it'll leave behind a drop of blood. This blood will not invalidate your prayer. This also is something that is excused. as is the case of blood from an injury. Like, say you scratched yourself or someone else scratched you, and so you started bleeding from a cut or a wound of some kind. This blood is also excused in the prayer unless it becomes a very large amount, or unless it leaves your body and comes back onto your body, then also it won't be excused. So like if you're bleeding from your hand and then it dripped onto your foot, that would not be excused. That would invalidate your prayer. As long as the blood is on your hand, it's excused. But once it leaves your body, it stops being excused. So then if it lands on your body someplace else, that will invalidate your prayer. What else is excused here? By the way, this fleas, lice, mosquitoes, and bed bugs, that's not the full list. Really, all kinds of bugs, if you hit it in the prayer and the body of the bug is gone, but it leaves behind blood or pus, then this is excused. Well, it leaves behind blood. Let's just say blood, not pus. Then he says the area of cupping and blood taking. Many of you know what's meant by cupping, or it's hijama in Arabic. This is a medical practice that the Prophet ﷺ used to partake in. Yes, thank you, sister. Blister is the word I was thinking of earlier. Couldn't think of it, mashallah. But cupping is a medical procedure that the Prophet ﷺ used to do. And it's highly advisable for you to do it as well. It's when you go to a knowledgeable doctor of Arabic medicine, and what they'll do is they'll make some small cuts in certain places of your body, and they'll put a cup over that place and apply heat. And what it'll do is it'll suck blood out from your body. And they know exactly where to put the cup so that the blood that gets sucked out is like bad blood, like blood that has toxins and things built up in it. It pulls that out of your body so that you'll be healthier. And so if you have this done to you, and then after you've had the blood removed from your body, then you go to make salat and maybe a little bit of extra blood starts coming out from that place, this extra blood will be excused. Also from blood taking. Okay, al-fahs, this is, sometimes you need to have blood drawn, not because you're doing hijama, but for some other purpose. You have blood drawn from your body, and sometimes the place where the blood was drawn from will, like a little bit of blood will come out afterwards. So if it comes out afterwards, this blood is excused and will not invalidate your salat. He mentions the excretion of flies and the urine of bats. Okay, so for example, if you take off your thobe and hang it in the closet, and then you lay down to sleep for the night, and then when you wake up in the morning, you see a fly sitting on your thobe, and then the fly flies off. Okay, well, who knows? Maybe that fly, before he landed on your thobe, maybe that fly had landed on some poop and had little bits of poop on his feet, and then he landed on your thobe. Okay, or maybe he even laid a little bit of fly poop on your thobe while he was sitting there. This stuff is excused. Okay, this type of najasa generally is too small for you to see anyway. And as a rule, najasa that's too small for you to see, or at least a person with average sight, if it's so small that a person of average sight can't see it, then it's automatically going to be excused. Urine of bats, I don't really have an explanation for that, but according to the text, if bat urine got on your body or on your clothing, it would be excused. I don't know anyone that this has happened to, but remember that in the past, a lot of the masjids did not have roofs. So if there's no roof on the masjid and people are in there praying and it's Isha time and it's dark out, the bats are flying over your head. It's possible that a bat might, drip something on you while they're flying by. And according to this text, that would be excused. He then mentions, and the urine of the incontinent. So if a person has incontinence, meaning that their urine is dripping, okay, they can't stop urine from coming out of their body. It drips every now and then. We mentioned earlier in the book that this person, what their requirement is that they must wash away the urine from their body and clothing. And then they must block up the place that the urine is dripping from, and they must secure the blockage in place so it doesn't move. And they must make wudu, and then they must pray. And they must do all of those things without having a delay in between them. And they cannot start that process until after the salat time has come in. So once the time is in, then they clean themselves and block the opening and secure the blockage and cover their aura and make wudu and go to a place where they can make salat, and then they make the salat. They do all of that without having delays in between. This is the rule for the person who has incontinence. And when they make their wudu, they don't make wudu with the intention of entering a state of purity. Rather, they make their wudu with the intention of what? Of salat being permissible for them. Okay, that way, even though they're going to drip during the salat will still be permissible for them because that was their intention. Okay, and because the urine of a person with incontinence is excused in the prayer. Because of his incontinence, if he drips, during the salat, it's excused. His salat is still valid. This would not be the case for someone who's not incontinent. Next, the author, may Allah have mercy on him, says, and the blood of the abnormal female bleeding. Okay, sometimes a woman will bleed from her private parts, and this blood is not menstrual blood. It's not because she's on her period, and it's not postpartum bleeding either. It's not because she recently gave birth. Okay, sometimes a woman will bleed because of sickness or injury. This is called in Arabic istihada. And the woman who's bleeding due to sickness or injury, this woman still has to pray. Okay, she doesn't say, oh, I'm bleeding from my private, so that means I don't pray. No, if it's not menstruation and it's not postpartum bleeding, she must pray. So what does she do? She follows the same rules that the incontinent person does. She waits until the prayer time comes in. Then she washes her blood away. Then she blocks up the hole the blood is coming out from. She secures the blockage. She makes wudu with the intention of making salat permissible for her. She makes sure her aura is covered. She goes to a place where she can pray, and she performs the prayer. She does all of those things after the salat time comes in and without any delay between them. And if blood comes out while she's in the salat, then that blood is excused, meaning it will not break her prayer. It will not invalidate her prayer. Next, the author, may Allah have mercy on him, says, the fluid of ulcers and vesicles where the smell has altered. Okay, so if you have an ulcer or a vesicle and a fluid comes out, okay, this would be like the case of the blister, that fluid that comes out, which is not really, it's not blood and it's not pus. Okay, the fluid that comes out of a blister, this fluid is not najas. Okay, the fluid that comes out of a blister is not najas unless it has changed. So if it's changed, if the color of it has changed because it mixed with blood or pus, well then now it's contaminated. Or if the smell of it changed, this would also suggest that that something is going on here. What the author is saying is that if the smell has changed, but the color hasn't, then it's excused. It's excused. And all of these examples that he says here, okay, from in this whole paragraph, all of these examples of blood and pus and urine, all of these examples, what does he say? The little of that, as well as large amounts, are excused. So these examples here, a small amount is excused, and even if it's a large amount, it would be excused. That's what he says here. But what I know is that there are actually more details on this issue, especially when it comes to blood. There's differences depending on what the cause of the blood is. Like, did you cause the blood yourself or did someone else cause it? There's differences depending on whether the blood is your own blood or if it's the blood of somebody else. And in most cases, only a small amount is excused. In most cases, only a small amount is excused. Then he says, unless one spreads a cloth which contains that, or carries it for no necessity, then only the little amount is excused, not the large. So he's saying if you, chose to put on a piece of clothing, or perhaps put it down to pray upon it, a piece of cloth, which contains these types of blood, and you had no need to do so, well, then only a small amount would be excused. Or if you're carrying something that has najasa on it, only a small amount would be excused, not a large amount. And when we say a small amount, what exactly do we mean when we say a small amount? The scholars, they say the size of a silver dirham. So the old silver coins that they used in the past were called dirhams, and a dirham was roughly the size of a quarter. So anything that is, smaller than a quarter is considered to be a small amount. For those of you who have cats, it's the same rule with cat hair. Cat hair is najas. And if you have a pet cat, you're going to find little cat hairs spread around your house, maybe even on your clothing. And cat hair, because it's najas, it will invalidate the prayer, but only if you have more than a quarter's worth of hair on your body. Okay, if the total number of cat hairs scattered all around your body and around your clothing, if the total of it, if you put it all together, would be smaller than a quarter, then in that case, it would be excused. He says also a little of external blood. By external, what he means is someone else's blood, not your own blood, someone else's blood. So if someone else was bleeding and you got blood on your body or on your clothes, a small amount is excused, except dog and swine. So unless that blood is coming from a dog or coming from a pig or coming from something that's part dog or something that's part pig, then that blood, which is not your own, is also excused as long as it's only a small amount. If one squeezes a spot or boil, okay, so if you have, for example, like a zit or some kind of bump or boil, and you squeezed it, and that's why it bled. This means you afflicted this. You did it to yourself. It was your own action that made you bleed. In this case, also only a small amount is excused. Says, or kills I don't know why, but so my copy, my Arabic language copy of this book, and I have several different copies, the word they use here is the word for flea. I'm not sure why he translates it as beetle, especially since this very same word was used in the last paragraph, and he correctly translated it as flea. Here it says beetle. So please scratch out the word beetle and write the word flea. He says, if one squeezes a spot or boil or kills a flea, then only the little is excused. Okay, what he means by that is the body of the flea. Earlier, I gave some examples where just blood from a flea was there. So, like if you swiped the flea and the body of it flew off, you flung the body away, but you left behind a spot of blood, well, the blood is excused. Here, we're saying, what if you didn't fling the flea off? What if you know, itched, you scratched, and you ended up killing the flea, and the flea's body is right there on your arm? Or maybe you slapped yourself in order to kill whatever was there, like a flea or a mosquito. What we're saying is if it's a flea, because it's very, very small, if it's a flea, that dead body does not invalidate your prayer. It's excused. Yeah, this is contrary to what I remember when I was learning this book. What I remember is that the body of the animals is najis, and it does break the prayer. So, like, if it leaves blood behind, that's excused, but the body of these insects is not excused. This is what I remember learning. And then the author here, look, he even says the same thing. This next sentence, he says the shell of the beetle, but the Arabic text says the skin of the flea. Okay, the skin of the flea and what's similar aren't excused. Okay, so the actual body, okay, the skin of it, the body of the flea, and whatever's similar to a flea, meaning other kinds of insects, things that, if you pulled a leg off of it, it wouldn't bleed. Their bodies are not excused. This is what I remember learning. Alhamdulillah, it's here, but this translation definitely makes it seem a little confusing. Anyway, with this, we come to the end of the list of things that are excused in the prayer. All of these examples, okay, in these examples, we're not saying that these things are no longer najis. And we're not saying that these things are now purified. All the things in this list, from where it says the area of one's cleansing, all the way down to the skin of the flea and what's similar, aren't excused. Everything in that list, these things remain najis filthy. But they're excused, meaning they don't break your salat. They don't invalidate your salat, but they're still najis, and they can still contaminate something else. They don't affect your prayer, but they can still affect other things. So keep that in mind. Then the author, may Allah have mercy on him, says, if one prays with a physical impurity, meaning if someone has najasa on his body or on his clothing, or if he touches it, okay? But he's talking here about one that's not excused. So after giving you a whole list of types of najis that are excused, now he's saying, well, what do you do if something that's not excused has afflicted you? He said, absent-minded or ignorant. Okay, so what's the reason why you're praying with some kind of najis on you? Was it that you were absent-minded, meaning you forgot it was there? Okay, this sometimes happens. You get a bit of najis on you. You tell yourself you'll clean it later, and then you forget about it. And then when prayer time comes, you go and you make salat, and you had completely forgotten that you have najasa on you. This is what's meant by absent-minded. You forgot that it was there. Or ignorant. By ignorant, what we mean is you didn't know it was there. Sometimes you have I don't know, you weren't aware that the najasa is there, and then During the prayer, you realize it's there. Okay, you go to put your hands, in front of your stomach as we do in the prayer, and now suddenly you notice something on your sleeve. You didn't know it was there when you started the prayer, but you were ignorant of it. But then you found out it was there. Or perhaps it's the case that you knew it was there, but you were ignorant of the fact that it breaks the prayer. Okay? In either of these cases, whether you did it absent-mindedly, or whether you didn't know it was there, or whether you knew it was there but didn't know it broke the prayer, in all of these cases, if you come to know for sure that najasa was present while you were praying, then you are obligated to repeat that prayer. I remind you, we're talking about what kind of najasa here? Something that's not excused. We already went through the list of what's excused. If you have najasa on you during the prayer and it's not excused, okay, the short answer is you need to pray that prayer over again. And the only time that would happen is if you were either absent-minded, meaning you forgot it was there, or you were ignorant, meaning you didn't know it was there in the first place, or maybe you didn't think it would affect the prayer due to your ignorance of the rules. Well, in these cases, once you learn that, oh, that does break your prayer, or once you learn that, oh, that was there when you prayed, then what must you do? You must repeat that prayer. All right? Wujuban, meaning it's an obligation. You must repeat that prayer. MashaAllah. Let's pause here for questions. That's the end of condition number 7, which pertains to najas, filth. I'll look for some questions before we go into number 8. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh, to those who salamed me. I'm here. I know you can't see me, but what can I say? I don't control the channel. I don't know what happened, but inshallah, it'll get fixed. And if not, well then, whatever Allah willed to be is what will happen. Okay, we accept the qadr of Allah. Number Salat. The author, may Allah have mercy on him, says, oh, look at that, I'm back. Alhamdulillah. Number 8. The author, may Allah have mercy on him, says, oh wait, somebody asked a question. How can you pray if you can't remove a tattoo? So if you are not able to remove the tattoo, because you don't have the means, like you can't afford it, you can't afford to have the procedure done, then you just so the ruling of the Shafi'i school is that you pray your prayers the way everyone else does, and then once you've saved enough money to have the tattoo removed, you're obligated to remove the tattoo, and then you have to repeat all the prayers you prayed while you had the tattoo. It's the ruling of the Shafi'i school when it comes to tattoos. My sheikhs, or at least some of my sheikhs, were aware of a ruling in a different madhab, and I'm not sure which one. But there's a different madhab where the ruling in that madhab is if you have a tattoo, you just have to wash that place. You pour flowing, purifying water over that place, and once you've done that, then the area is considered to be purified, and you can make your salats and you won't have to repray them afterwards. So, if anyone watching this has a tattoo, I strongly recommend you take that saying from that other madhab because it's going to be easier for you. But I also strongly recommend you do as the Shafi'i school says and have the tattoo removed at your earliest opportunity. MashaAllah. That's great. All right, number 8. Someone asked, so you're praying and you kill a mosquito or gnat on you and the body stays. You must remake your prayer? Yes, this is the strong opinion in the Shafi'i school. That although the blood from that mosquito or gnat is excused, the dead body is not excused. Okay. This is, of course, if it died. You know, sometimes you can hit a bug and it doesn't die right away. It's there and, you see one leg still kicking. And so it doesn't break your prayer until it dies, because it's the dead body that's najis, not the living body. So if in that case, you might be able to fling it off of you, just like with your finger, just kind of, pew, fling it off of your body real fast before it dies, and then your salat will not be broken. Someone asked, must you repeat that tattoo washing for each wudu? What I recall from that madhab, and honestly, I really don't know all the details. I'm not even sure which madhab it was from. But from what I recall, it was one time that was required. You just had to wash over that spot with water one time, and then it was considered purified after that. So you didn't have to do it every time. This is for a tattoo anywhere on the body. I remind you that our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said that the one who gets a tattoo is cursed, and the one who gives that person a tattoo is also cursed. So tattoos, this isn't something we should be playing around with. Tattoos are an enormous sin. They're like very haram. It's a curse. It's a cursed thing to do. So none of us should be doing this. I know many of us converted to Islam and maybe we had the tattoos before we converted. I understand that, but still you should, at your very first opportunity, have it removed. Any more questions before we do number 8? Let's see if we can get through number 8, inshallah. The 8th condition of the salat, it says covering of nakedness. So what that means is your awrah, the part of your body which you are obligated to cover in the salat, your awrah must be covered for the whole prayer, from the start of the prayer all the way to the end of the prayer. If at any point in your salat, your awrah is uncovered, then your salat is immediately broken. So one thing you need to be very careful of is if you're someone who likes to wear, t-shirts or polo shirts, or maybe even a dress shirt that's not very long, be careful, because when you bend over for ruku', the back of your shirt will come up. And what will happen very often is the lower back of the person will then become uncovered, and this will ruin their salat. Their salat will be broken at that point. Okay, so be careful of that. Also, be careful, women, if you have like a very big loose shirt. A lot of Muslim women like to wear very loose clothing, which is good, because tight clothing is definitely not good. But sometimes what will happen is the woman's shirt is so loose that when she bends over into ruku', the front of her shirt falls away from her stomach, like of a long distance, because it's so loose, and then it becomes easy to just see right up the bottom of her shirt because of how loose it is. So you also want to be mindful of that. I definitely recommend for everyone to wear long shirts. Okay, long enough that when you go into ruku', it's not going to come up in the back, and long enough in the front that It's not gonna, like what I just described isn't gonna happen. But what exactly is this nakedness that you have to cover? It says, may Allah have mercy on the author. It says the nakedness of a man and a slave woman is, it says that between the navel and the knee. Personally, I would have said is what's between the navel and the knee. But long story short, everything between the navel and the knee is the aura. This must be covered in the prayer by men, and it must be covered in the prayer by women who are property of someone. If you're a slave girl, if you're owned by another human being, then in the prayer, you're obligated only to cover what's between the navel and the knee. The navel itself is not part of the aura, and the knee itself is not part of the aura. So if your knee is showing, that does not break the prayer. If your navel is showing, that does not break the prayer. However, you have to cover at least part of your navel and at least part of your knee in order to ensure that everything between them is covered. Okay, because everything between the navel and the knee is the aura and has to be covered. So make sure you cover at least part of your navel and at least part of your knee, because that's the only way to guarantee that everything that needs to be covered is covered. And beware of shorts that cover the knee when you're standing, but do not cover the knee when you're sitting. You know, some people, when they make salat, they think their shorts are long enough because it reaches the knee. And then after that sujood, when they come to sit between the two sujoods, the shorts ride up a little bit and part of the thigh becomes visible, which means their prayer is now broken. Okay, so definitely be careful about that as well. Next, the author, may Allah have mercy on him, says the free woman. Okay, so the first case we talked about was men and slave girls. Men and slave girls are the ones who in the salat only have to cover what's between the navel and the knee. But what about a woman who's free? What about a woman who's not a slave? What about a woman who's not property? What does she need to cover? The free woman in her salah and in front of foreigners I think what it should be saying is the nakedness of the free woman in her salat and in front of foreigners is all her body except the face and the two hands. So the free woman, when she's in the salat, she must cover up her entire body except for her face and her hands. When we say face, what do we mean? We mean what goes from the normal hairline to the bottom of the front of the chin and what's between the ears. This is her face. Okay, that is allowed to show during the salat. Ears are not allowed to show because they're not part of the face. This area underneath your mouth, like the bottom of your tongue here, is not allowed to show, not in the prayer, nor when you're walking around in the streets. Okay, because what does it say here? It says, in her salat and in front of foreigners. Foreigners doesn't mean people from other countries, you know. Foreigners means men who are not her close kin, nor her husband. That's what it means. Okay, men who are not mahrams for her, nor her husband. She needs to cover up in front of those people. She needs to cover every part of her body except for her face and her hands. When I say her hands, I mean she's allowed to show everything from the wrist to the tip of the fingers. But anything above the wrist, any part of the forearm, is not permissible for her to show to other people. He says in front of her non-marriageable kin. So now we're talking about, well, what if there's men around, but the men actually are her close kin, her mahrams? If mahram males are the only males that are nearby, It is what's between the navel and the knee. So for the free woman, if the only men around are like her own sons or her own brothers or her own uncles or her own nephews, or her grandparents or her grandchildren, okay, she only needs to cover what's between the navel and the knee around those people, because these people are mahrams for her. Okay, but the moment there's a man who is not a mahram and not her husband either, well, then she now needs to cover her whole body except for her face and her hands. By the way, when it says that a man who is a mahram, that she only needs to cover between her navel and her knee for the man who's a mahram, what we mean there is if there's not going to be any fitna and if there's not going to be any desire involved. Okay, because sometimes, those things might occur. Those things might occur. Okay, so if you're, I don't know, if you're worried that such and such a relative of yours will look at you with desire if you only cover what's between your navel and your knee, well, then you cover up more than that. Although the obligation is upon that person not to look. But if there's going to be fitna, if there's going to be desire, well, then you need to cover up more of your body. Someone asked, do you have to cover when you make wudu? The covering that we're talking about right now, it applies to when you're in the salat, and other than in the salat, it depends on who else is around. It doesn't depend on what you're doing. So you're either in salat or you're out of salat. If you're in salat, then you have to cover everything we said. If you're out of the salat, then what the woman has to cover depends on who else is around. Okay, so if the only men around are your mahrams, then you just need to cover between your navel and your knee. But if you pray, then you have to cover your whole body except your face and your hands. If other men are around you that are not mahrams and not your husband, well, then now you need to cover your whole body except your face and hands, even if you're not praying, because the men around you are not mahrams for you. So normally when a woman makes wudu, she's going to go to a place where there are no men, right? She's going to go to the bathroom, or she's going to go to a public bathroom that only women are allowed into. So ordinarily, she's going to be in a place where there are no men around. And in that situation, what does she need to cover up? Well, if the women are all Muslims, all Muslim women, and there's no fear of fitna, well, then what she needs to cover around those women is what's between her navel and her knee, because there's no men around. However, if the women that are around her include women who are not Muslims, well, then she should cover her chest. She should cover from like her chest down to her knee, if non-Muslim women are around. After that, the author, may Allah have mercy on him, says the condition of the veil, and when he says veil here, he means whatever cloth you're using to cover your nakedness. He doesn't mean like a niqab that's veiling your face, and he's not talking about the hijab only. He's talking about whatever you're using to cover your nakedness, talking to men and women, okay, free people and slaves, whatever it is that you're using to cover your nakedness, what must it do? It says, well, the condition is that which hides the color of the skin. Okay, so as long as your garment is such that a person at a normal conversation distance away from you cannot see the color of your skin through the fabric, well, then that fabric is covering your nakedness. So what matters is the color of what's beneath the fabric. So for what's on your hair, the question is, can they see the color of your hair? If it's covering your skin, the question is, can a person see the color of your skin through the fabric that you're covering it with, if it's even fabric, because it doesn't have to be fabric. Okay, you can cover yourself with cloth, you can cover yourself with something else. Okay, even if the thing that you're covering yourself with is very tight and it reveals the shape of your body. Okay, as long as it prevents a person from seeing the color of your skin, then we say that it is covering your nakedness. Okay, now I'm not encouraging you to wear tight clothes, because wearing tight clothes, if it's tight around your chest or your midsection or your crotch area or your thighs, this is haram to do in public. It's haram to do in public, and you will need to repent from that. But we still say your nakedness is covered. So if a woman did do that and salat time came in, she still needs to make salat, even if she is committing something haram by wearing the tight clothes. That doesn't change the fact she's obligated to pray when the time is in. And those tight clothes, as long as it's covering everything except for her face and her hands, it will count as covering her nakedness for purposes of the salat, but that will not excuse the fact that she did something haram. MashaAllah. He says, even if murky water, So imagine there's somebody naked. They need to pray a salat. They don't have any clothes that they can put on to cover their nakedness. Well, like we said, as long as they cover their body with something that prevents others from being able to see the color of your skin, then we say you've covered your nakedness. So if there's like a pond there and the water in the pond is murky, like brownish water, and if you go stand in the pond, people cannot see the color of your skin, then that means you're covering your nakedness and you can make your salat there in the water. Some of you might be thinking, well, how are you going to make salat in the water? Well, let's just assume for right now, the salat that the person is trying to make is a janazah. Okay, so you don't need to bow or do sujood or anything. You need to do a janazah salat, and you were naked. You can go into the murky water, and your nakedness will be covered, and you can perform a valid janazah prayer. Okay, the same would also be true if the water is not murky, but it just has like a lot of stuff floating on it. Sometimes a pond will have a lot of like lily pads or whatever, like vegetation of all sorts floating on the surface of the water, maybe leaves that fell from nearby trees. So it's like the whole surface of the water is covered up. And so if you wade into that water, those things floating on the surface will block people from being able to see the color of your skin. If you're in that situation, then that's the same situation as murky water. Because what matters is that people can't see the color of your skin or your hair. It does not matter that the thing you're covering your body with, whether it's fabric or not, that doesn't matter. What matters is whether the color of your skin or your hair is blocked from people's eyes. He says, but not a tight tent or darkness. Aha. So even though water can be considered a covering for your nakedness, you are not considered to be covering your nakedness if you go inside of a tent. If you're the only person in the tent, and maybe the tent is very small, it's only big enough for one person in there, and you're in there naked, you cannot perform a valid salat like that. Okay, because your nakedness is not covered. That's because a tent is not considered to be a covering. Similarly, darkness. If you're completely naked and the place where you're at is completely just pitch black, nobody even can see any part of your body, not the color of your skin, not the color of your hair. They don't even know you're there because it's so dark. You cannot make salat naked. Okay, darkness does not count as a cover for your nakedness. a tight tent does not count as a cover for your nakedness, but rather putting something on your body like a fabric or even like clay. Uh, okay, that would be, if you just cover yourself in clay. This counts as a covering. It says the veil isn't obligatory from beneath. So whatever you're using to cover your body, it needs to block people from seeing the color of your skin from all the sides and from above. Your garment needs to prevent people from seeing your skin from what? From 5 directions, from above and from all 4 sides. But your garment does not need to block from underneath. So if you were praying on a fire escape, if you're making salat on a fire escape, some of these fire escapes, they're just like metal bars and things. Somebody walking on the sidewalk underneath you could look up and see you from the bottom. If someone walking by on the sidewalk looks up and can see up your skirt or up your thobe and see your nakedness from below, this does not break your salat, because you're not obligated to cover your nakedness from every direction. Rather, you're obligated to cover your nakedness from the sides, all 4 sides, and from above. You're not obligated to cover your nakedness from below. So the fact that you left the bottom of your thobe open isn't an issue. It is permissible to cover some of the nakedness with one's hand. Okay, so if you're, say you're wearing something, let's say, I don't know, let's say there's a woman, she's wearing like, appropriate prayer clothes, it's covering everything that needs to be covered, and then all of a sudden, her sleeve tore, like a hole in her sleeve opened up. And now, because of that, there's a part of her forearm which is no longer covered. How can she make a salat when part of her aura is uncovered? Well, it's permissible for her to cover that spot with her hand. And she can just pray the whole prayer, covering that spot with her hand. Okay, if she can figure out how to pray the whole prayer without moving her hand from that spot. The condition here, if you're covering part of your nakedness with your hand, the condition is that you don't break wudu in the process. So if the place that needs to be covered is your private part, and you intend to cover that with your hand, then don't use the inside part of your hand, because the inside part of your hand, if you touch your private part with it, it'll break your wudu and therefore break the salat. In that case, you would have to cover it with the back side of your hand. He says, if one can only find that which covers both private parts, one must use it for those parts. He says here one uses it, but the actual text says one must use it for those parts. So we're talking about a case where a person, whatever clothing they have, it's not enough to cover their nakedness. Okay, but the salat time is going to go out. And of course, we always have to pray within the salat time. There's never an excuse to let the salat time go out without praying. So what do you do? In this case, you cover as much of your nakedness as you can. And the first priority would be your private parts, your front and your back private parts. So if the garment you have is only big enough to cover those 2 parts, well, then you cover those 2 parts and you make your salat within the time. Okay? And then when you get a proper garment, you repray that salat. He says, if it only suffices one of them, so what if this, whatever you found to cover your nakedness with, it's not even enough to cover your front and back private part. It's only enough to cover one of them, one or the other. He says, in that case, one gives precedence to the frontal private part. So if the only thing you can find is something that can cover your front, but not also your back, then you cover your front. He says one buttons one's shirt or tightens around the waist. What he means by this is you have to. All right, one must button one's shirt or tighten around the waist if one's nakedness would appear during bowing or other. So if your garment is such that if you bow, your nakedness is going to show, well, then you have to make sure that doesn't happen, whether that's by buttoning your shirt so that when you bow, it doesn't come away up here by the neck, and therefore a person would be able to see in there. Or if you have to tie it, like hold it at the waist so that it doesn't come away from your body in ruku', come away from your stomach and allow a person to see up there. If that's what's necessary, then that's what you have to do. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. One thing that wasn't mentioned here that's important to say is if your aura became exposed during the prayer through no fault of your own, and you immediately, without any delay, immediately covered it back up, then your salat doesn't get broken. Okay, an example would be like if you're praying outside and everything is covered the way it's supposed to be covered, and then suddenly a gust of wind comes and it blows the woman's sleeve and like a little bit of her forearm shows, and she immediately pulled the sleeve back. Like it was just the tiniest split second that her forearm was showing before she covered it back up. In this case, her salat is not broken, okay, because she covered it up immediately. And in the first place, it wasn't exposed by something she did. It was exposed by something else, like the wind. In this case, the salat is not broken, but the condition is that the outer was covered up immediately, not 1 or 2 seconds later, but like split second later. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. I think I answered most of the questions. There's one more I haven't gotten to. The sister asks, if your dress or shirt sleeves only come to your elbow, is this acceptable, especially when it is very hot? That is not acceptable in the salat. The free woman must cover all the way to her wrists in the salat in order for her salat to be valid. However, there is a saying that if a woman is working, like say she's someone who works, she's like a farmer who works out in the fields, doing manual labor, there's a saying, because she's not in the salat at that moment, there's a saying that she, like if part of her arm shows, like part of her forearm shows because of the work, like she's reaching out to grab something, bending over, doing this, if part of her forearm shows, then that's permissible. I don't know that she could just have a sleeve that only goes to the elbow. I don't know if the entirety of the forearm can show. But I did hear that if there's a situation where the woman is working, she's like a person who labors, does physical labor, and because of her labor, her forearm partially shows, that this is something that's acceptable. But it wouldn't be acceptable in the salat, no. Yes, if you're praying alone, the outer rules do matter. Remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees you wherever you are. Okay. And Allah commands that you cover your nakedness when you worship Him. So even if there's no one else around to see you, you still need to cover your nakedness because it's worship. You're worshiping Allah. And one should be shy to even think to do something like that while showing their privates, for example. But even if you're not showing your privates, even showing part of your thigh, you know, we here in America, mashallah, this Western culture has poisoned us in a lot of ways. where things that are actually terrible things, we don't regard them as being terrible. You know, that if you watch old basketball games like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and them, you know, their shorts used to only be like halfway down their thighs. You know, half their thigh was showing, and people in this country, in this culture, they thought that was okay. They didn't have any problem with men showing half of their thigh. You know, but if they had been right thinking, if they had even a little bit of the light of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in their hearts, they would be horrified by that. Okay, it's not okay to show part of your thigh in public. That's not okay at all. And some of these sisters, man, they're showing so much without any shame. It's amazing. It's amazing. May Allah guide us to a state where we truly hate that which is haram. May Allah put us in a state where we don't need to struggle to avoid the haram, that our own heart despises it so much that we would never want to do it. Never mind all of us that it's actually an obligation to hate the haram, to hate whenever anyone disobeys Allah. Not just hate if you're the one doing it, but if someone else is disobeying Allah, you need to hate that as well. And the only way we're going to know what's haram is to learn. Okay, we don't learn good from bad by seeing what's normal in this society. Because I'm telling you, in this society, everything's turned on its head. Things that we should hate, the society wants us to love. Things that we should love, the society wants us to hate. Okay, the shaitan has been at work here for a long time, and we see the fruits of it. We see the fruits of it. You know, the degeneracy in this country has gotten to an all-time high. I ask Allah to keep us on the straight path. I ask Allah to increase our iman and to raise our rank and our status and to grant us that we worship him as he deserves to be worshipped. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. I'll see you next week, insha'Allah ta'ala. We'll pick up where we left off. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.